It's been about 20 years since I saw this film. This is one of those places I used to go to a gas station when I was younger and work, with all the older people who would give me these movie recommendations. And one of the films that I got recommended to me was this film, one I'd never heard about before. It's Dead Presidents from directors Albert and Alan Hughes.
Yeah, this is one of I know good friends who were absolutely obsessed with this movie and have seen it hundreds and hundreds of times. So let's talk about it.
Hope you've got your money. Welcome back to the show. This is Kyle from goatfromreviews.com.
Hi, this is Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you to continue to support the show. Hey, another way you can support the show, join the Patreon. We got a Patreon with great content, great deals, and opportunities to tell us what movies we can review in the future. With, of course, a shout out to you. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics reviews as well as ours. And we're talking about a staple from 1995. Got a lot of mixed reviews. Some people really loved it. Some people kind of not so much. And we're going to talk about what kind of end of the spectrum we're kind of on with it.
So when high school graduate Anthony Curtis enlists in the Marine Corps rather than college, he's deployed to the Vietnam conflict, where he makes lifelong friendships with those that make it home. When he returns to the Bronx, he finds normal is kind of a thing of the past, and he's forced to make ends meet, turning to a life of crime. So it's the Hughes brothers, who I became later known with, because I really love the movie The Book of Eli, which is something that they've covered. Yeah. Albert Hughes also directed a film called Alpha that came out a few years ago, which is, I definitely almost got a good nap in the theater for that one. So I would say they're better together than when they're apart.
I think they did Menace to Society. That's the previous one from this one. And then I think they did From Hell. I'm not going to... Yep. Cinematographer, yes, is Lisa Rinsler. She also did cinematography for Trees Lounge. She did a bunch of short films for Robert Mapplethorpe before he passed away from AIDS. And he was primarily a photographer. So with her, he used a lot of her short films. Those kind of short films got her in the spotlight to get work in the Hollywood system. Okay, who's it starring?
Well, so this stars Lawrence Tate,
yeah.
Who is somebody that I don't think Lawrence Tate has ever really exploded on film. You know, he was in films like Crash, he was in films like Ray, but I don't really think he's ever really had that presence in film. And
no, he gets enmeshed in what he's in. He doesn't really stand out from the projects. He gets enmeshed into the environment.
Yeah, but watching him in this film again, I'm just convinced that, man, he really should have had a bit more of insurgents to begin with, because I think that this movie is carried heavily on his shoulders. You know, you can say it comes on the directing, it comes on the writing, it comes on the supporting performances. It does, but you have to remember, like, this is a movie that there are big names around him, but not nearly as many big names at the time as the ones that we would later see. It's not like he's being held up by these, like, acting powerhouses. It's just a lot of people that are kind of breaking in, except for maybe, like, Keith David.
Oh, wonderful Keith David. He's got the voice I have right now, Keith David, right.
Yeah, the president from Rick and Morty, if you guys are animation fans.
2 years after this, he would do Spawn, too. Yeah.
He did the HBO series for Spawn, yeah.
Yeah, and then you got Chris Tucker, and then you have Bokeem Woodbine, who plays this kind of very, like, moral person who's doing very corrupt things, really kind of a hard contrast. And then you have Terrence Howard in this as well, rounding out the starring cast. Talk a little more about it.
So as far as Bokeem Woodbine, I wanted to mention him because I think it's just such an odd juxtaposition, the character that he plays in Vietnam versus the one that returns home.
Yep.
And I think that's such an interesting piece of, I don't know if I would call it dramatic irony, but very like the way in which his character is formed is someone who basically has forgotten what he went through and in some ways kind of pushed it to the outer portions of his life. I think Bokeem Woodbine is another one of those actors that, again, he appears in a lot of stuff. But if you look on IMDb or on Letterboxd, some of his most popular performances come from Spider-Man, Homecoming, and Ghostbusters Afterlife. He's in those movies for like a scene each. Yeah. So it's like, really, he's notable for these films where he's barely in them. And yet he has some of these movies where he just shocks, terrifies, and expounds and becomes a force of nature for the scenes he's in.
It'd be interesting to kind of compare and contrast this movie to, like, The Deer Hunter, where it's a group of friends and comrades and everything who go to Vietnam and then after come back from Vietnam, and they're changed people. This is very kind of similar take of The Deer Hunter, of a group of people that go to Vietnam and then come back and their lives have been changed, their relationships have changed, and it doesn't turn out the best. War interrupts a love story in this, just much like The Deer Hunter. War interrupts a love story, and also coming home the person coming home interrupts the love story. And I think that is the crucial element to that. I don't know if you want to put it in the title, but the thing that gets me is the title. It's almost into the third act.
Yeah, that's true. The title doesn't really, it's, as far as a marketing thing, because that's really what it is. It's a great sounding title. If it was on a musical album, I would buy the album and listen to every song. But it's one of those things, I guess, when I was 15 and I watched it, I didn't know the terminology "dead presidents" meant money. So it just kind of went over my head as a 15-year-old.
Yes, it's slang of.
But it's kind of this thing of, it's important to the culmination of the film, but watching it again, I guess in my head, I thought that the robbery sequence, I thought was this much larger portion of the film. And you're right, it's not really as much of a thing. It's more about the climax of the film.
No, and I appreciate what they did for this movie. There's a lot to absorb with this. And I think if you just change the title, you comment if you want to think, but if it's called Dead Presidents and it's about a bank robbery and how to lead up and back, put it in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see that as kind of the framing device for a portion of the film and have us flashing back to other events.
Or edit it right.
Planning this heist, and then you can see how they got to this point.
Yeah.
Because I think that would kind of link up with the whole narrative itself. Because the narrative does, this isn't exactly a bad thing, but the narrative does move and shift through a lot of different stages of life.
Yeah.
And it is kind of a bit happenstance. It is kind of a bit out of nowhere events, kind of things that happen.
Yeah.
That it's hard to see kind of a character journey all the way through, because he's kind of just surprised with all these events that happen. And he's just basically reacting to them a lot.
And that's just my writing brainstorming. If that's the name of the title of the movie, have it at the beginning, and then we have a little more sympathy, a little more empathy to the characters we see, the consequences of the bank robbery as we go back in time or jump back and forth. It'd be kind of interesting play for a writer's workshop and how you would rearrange this a little bit, or give it a different title and understand. That's kind of Roger Ebert was kind of review. It there's so much little small vignettes that just feels like if you had maybe one or two themes that you're really invested in, you keep it clear. But there's a lot of times where we're going off, we're going this way, where we don't keep our needle in the middle where we kind of think you need. Because our protagonist, we follow him through all the things, the ups and downs, where he's a hero. He's also the weakling. He's the planner, but also he's an idiot. Where you want somewhere kind of, let's find exactly where he is, the dynamic, right?
Yeah. And see, initially my thoughts, because that's an interesting place, is using that kind of as your beginning of the film. My thought for the beginning of the film should almost be the return from Vietnam, so that you can juxtapose scenes from before he left to scenes from after he returned, and you can really showcase the fact that he went and fought for his country. He went and did what he thought was right, and everyone who came back from Vietnam was harshly affected, but because of his race, he had an extra level of denial, compensation, recognition, no benefits for what he was able to do. And so I think being able to juxtapose that really nothing has changed for him, and yet everything has changed inside of him. And I think you could have done something interesting with that. Would have been similar to how Michael J. Fox is kind of the framing device for casualties of war as well, as it's him on the bus returning home, I think.
So yeah, it'd be interesting to just kind of see how would you, very similar to like the Deer Hunter, but also like Jacob's Ladder, and how Vietnam has consequences to any the life that he thinks he has.
Yeah, and this film coming out so close to like a Pulp Fiction, which plays with the form of time so much that you see a straightforward story like this. And while I think a lot of the elements in the film are strong, it's the organization of those elements that you can compare to films that were able to play with their narrative a bit better.
Yeah, and that was one thing, and I think they kind of picked up on it. Understand, there's a huge following of people who really love this movie, and I understand it. I get it. It is a rich story.
Yeah,
it just needs a simple thread to keep them connected, right? It's almost like a group of cans, but you want a string to connect them. But this group of cans, we can just move it around, right? We want that simple thread that throughout the whole movie. Something like Goodfellas does.
Yeah.
Throughout the change of time, they understand. I don't know, maybe you start off with like a big party, then when you know the dynamics of everybody, if you don't want to start with a bank robbery or something that you understand to play without doing a lot of exposition dumps. But I like the performance of Keith David. Wonderful. Everybody's acting is fabulous in this movie.
Yeah, Keith David, who's still going strong. I mean, hell, he's in Academy Award, Oscar nominated American Fiction this year. I mean, it's only for one scene, but he's in the damn movie. So it showcases that he's still fighting the good fight as an actor. He's still taking on these really strong character pieces. He's definitely the standout in the film for me, just because I adore Keith David. If you've ever seen
I
all
do
the
too.
video content I've done about Cloud Atlas, it's partially because of Keith David playing 6 different characters in that movie. So I will keep fighting the good fight for him. Yeah, it's a movie that I enjoy a lot of the elements of it, but I can see a lot of, it's going to sound mean, pedestrian storytelling in terms of how it is compiled at the end. You can tell that this, I believe, is the Hughes brothers' second film.
Yeah.
So they come out the gate just hitting with Menace to Society.
Which is a fabulous
But then
movie, yeah.
this film seems almost organized like a television movie, of the time, where things were a bit just like straightforward. We're not going to do anything too flashy, but what's in there is strong enough, I think, to overcome that.
And here's my next element that I was going to talk about. This kind of story, all of it, needs to be remade into like a True Detective kind of like 6-episode kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, I often think if you ask me what films should be remade, what things should be redone, it's films that I think were good, but not the classics. I know that that's not really the popular answer, because you remake the classics so that you can put the name on it. The Thing, The Fly, you can put the name on it. But the best remakes, I do feel, are the ones that take something that didn't fully work, but worked enough as a springboard. And I think you could have something pretty fantastic coming out of this film. So yeah, I'd like to see a new movie version, new TV show version, something.
Just
that
said nobody robs
plays with
banks
it.
for cash anymore. We're done with that.
But you've got your time period. You can still play with the
Yeah, you can play like maybe in the 80s and 70s. Yeah. So, what do you think of our analysis of Dead Presidents? Have you even seen it? My God.
Yeah, let us know your thoughts on it. Is it your favorite robbery film? Because I would probably put it as a movie that I really enjoy for the robbery sequence, even though it's a very small portion of it.
This movie got sandwiched between Reservoir Dogs and Heat.
Oh yeah, and the unfortunate thing is, like we said, it's not as strong as either one of those, and so it just gets swallowed up.
Yeah.
But maybe you disagree. Maybe you're one of the hundreds, thousands of people that praise the Dead Presidents.
95 was a weird year for movies, man. Some of the stuff we really liked was really weird. Yeah.
Yep. So let us know which Hughes film we should cover next down in the comments section. Thank you all for joining us so
Thank
very
you.
much. You can find all of my film reviews for 0 Dead Presidents. You can read those for free over at goatfilmreviews.com.
We should go like that for Halloween without makeup on.
Oh, man. I could rock it.
And you can find my show, The St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts. New episodes are coming up.